This episode of New Politics was released on the 12th of April, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
And hello to our audience, and a big hello to you, David. How has the week been on the campaign trail for you?
Look, it's the key part of being a political commentator, elections, because this is where everything's stripped bare. This is where governments lose elections, oppositions win them, or governments retain government and oppositions get hoisted off into another 3 years of difficulty. We see the strengths of the candidates, if they have any. We see the flaws of the candidates, if they have any. And sometimes the strengths are actually flaws and the flaws are actually strengths. It's been an interesting campaign, despite the claims of the mainstream media otherwise. I can't help but feel that some of them are disappointed that the polls aren't going their way.
And we've got all the big issues from the second week of the federal election campaign coming up. China features once again with the lease of the Darwin port up for debate. There's the battle between the Queensland and New South Wales divisions of the Liberal Party. That's actually a battle that's been going on behind the scenes for some time. There's the big backflip on the work from home policy from Peter Dutton. There's international issues, the market reaction to the US tariffs, the lack of reaction on the massacres continuing to happen in Palestine. There's the leaders' debate, a couple of strange incidents during the week as well, and all the latest opinion polls. And David, I think I've just taken up the entire episode just explaining what's on, but
thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week.
But there is that old saying that in Australia there is too many journalists and not enough news, but I think in our case there's too many issues and not enough time.
There are worse problems to have, of course, and the lack of interest found in the mainstream media won't be found here.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is.
It's the end of the second week of the federal election campaign, and this is generally the period where the campaign starts to settle down and meander just a little bit. The first week is the big bang, the second week is where everyone starts to get settled a little bit, and then the preparation starts for the final few weeks. And just like it was in the first week, China featured prominently in the second. This time it was about the lease of the Port of Darwin to the Chinese company Landbridge Group. And that was leased by the country Liberal Party in the Northern Territory in 2015 and approved by the federal Liberal Party for $506 million. And that was an incredibly bad deal. Peter Dutton was going to make an announcement on the Saturday about cancelling the lease to Landbridge, and this information was leaked to the Labor Party, and Anthony Albanese made the announcement the day before the Liberal Party was going to do exactly the same thing.
Australia needs to own the Port of Darwin. Well, we want it to be in Australian hands. We prefer that it be through superannuation funds or some other vehicle. That doesn't mean direct taxpayers, but we're prepared to go down the road of taxpayer direct involvement as well. That is something that we have had a consistent view on, not for 3 years, since 2016. We opposed it at the time. It was short-sighted for economic reasons, but also for national security reasons.
Now, it's obvious what the Liberal Party was trying to do here, whip up some more frenzy and more paranoia about China, but they failed in the sense that they were gazumped by the Labor Party on this, but it also fell apart because ultimately they just could not get around that contradiction that they were the ones who actually approved the lease back in 2015 when they were last in government.
It was probably the stupidest deal. Andrew Robb really should have been done for treason, I think. He ended up getting a nice plum job with a Chinese company, which obviously was a thank you for giving the Chinese government such a great deal. As someone, a friend of mine who knows this type of stuff at a governmental level said, it's one thing to privatise the electricity or the roads and sell them off overseas, because in the worst possible case, you can always rebuild an alternate system that cuts the owners out. You can't do that with a port. If we're that worried about China and it was really giving it to them, it wasn't renting it, leasing it, mortgaging it, or buying it or selling it. I guess the rough equivalent would be America selling Puerto Rico to the USSR for $100,000 a year for 100 years. Completely stupid. They'd have been a laughing stock. And the people who sold it, of course, also spent the next few election campaigns, including this one, trying to beat up China as a threat.
The other point is that there haven't actually been any issues at all with this lease or the management of the port by the Landbridge Group over the past 10 years. There haven't been any security issues or smuggling issues or anything like that. And I'm sure that some drugs have probably got through, but there just hasn't been a big issue about this. And if there is to be any dramas about this, it would be the fact that it was such a bad long-term deal for Australia and the Northern Territory government. And the lease was made for $506 million, or just $5 million per year over the 99-year period. So if I was going to cancel it, David, I'd cancel it on being a bad deal rather than the issues of national security. But that wasn't the path that the Liberal Party was going to take up. It was all going to be based around China bashing and ramping up all of these national security issues that they started going on about last week when that Chinese research vessel was travelling through the Southern Ocean. And I thought that we would have had enough hysteria about China last week, but they decided to ramp it up again this week. And the Labor Party was tipped off about this announcement. So by the time Peter Dutton was due to make his announcement, all he could really do was agree with what Albanese had said the day before. But for me, the other issue was that they were trying to ramp up hysteria about leasing out the Port of Darwin and hoping that everyone would have just forgotten about the fact that it was the Liberal Party that arranged and approved this lease in 2015. And it wasn't only this port. There's also the 50% lease in the Port of Newcastle, and that was approved by the Liberal Party in 2014 through the New South Wales government. So they just want everyone to forget that they were the ones behind this. And I don't have an issue with a Chinese company leasing these ports, but generally I would have thought that it would have been better for the government to own these ports or local companies to own something that's related to trade and importation, but for economic reasons. But for me, it's still that inherent contradiction that still has not been bridged yet. How is it possible that Australia's biggest trading partner, China, which also owns 99-year leases in two major ports in Australia and possibly other ports as well, is also regarded as Australia's biggest national security threat? And it can't be both of these things. So this is not a national security issue. It's got nothing to do with economic or trade issues. It might be a bad financial deal for Australia, but essentially it's a political problem with which both sides of politics are happy to play along with, especially the Liberal Party.
We're still very much 40 years down the track in a Cold War mindset. Must have an obvious enemy that is different from us or different to us. Preferably an enemy that we can dog whistle race about and complain about immigration, even though that inverted commas, enemies, close inverted commas, trademark, copyright. People have been coming here almost as long as Anglo people and have had a majorly positive effect on the Australian community, and yet are still treated like the other, even though there are Chinese families here 5, 6, 7 generations down. The dog whistle has been successful in the past and may be successful again, but not in this case, because no matter how they spin it, it was a bad deal. Morrison was involved, of course, as Treasurer, and I think you were right to point out that there's been no problems with them as tenants. If it was your house, they were mowing your lawn, they were painting, they were maintaining the place well. We haven't had any smuggling, we haven't had any obvious spying from the port. I'm sure there's some happening, but it's no different to what happens in Sydney Harbour or Melbourne ports or Wollongong, maybe just a little bit easier. And of course, we have people in China looking around there, and we're part of the Five Eyes. So we're sharing information both ways with the other four eyes on what's happening there. So if they decide to go all high and mighty about intelligence gathering, and this is as old as intelligence, the second oldest profession, no country is innocent and no country can really take the moral high ground, though they do on occasions, of course.
And speaking of intelligence, David, we're always on the lookout for things behind the scenes, and there wasn't much emphasis placed on this because I guess not many people know about it, but the reason why Peter Dutton's announcement on the Darwin ports was gazumped was because the details were leaked directly to the Labor Party campaign team. And behind the scenes, there is a battle between the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party and the Queensland division of the Liberal National Party. And that's a combined entity up in Queensland. And that's a battle that's been between the more right-wing Queensland division and the more moderate New South Wales. And that's not to say that the New South Wales Liberals are a paradise of moderation. It's got some people who are to the right of Genghis Khan, and it's also the home of the religious right, but generally it is more moderate than Queensland. And the New South Wales branch would prefer to lose the election, which means that Dutton doesn't become Prime Minister, and then they would go on to share in the spoils of defeat. And this might sound strange to a lot of people, but there's a lot of people in politics who would prefer to lose an election if that means that they can consolidate power either for themselves or for their faction within the party. And the Liberal Party isn't alone in doing this. That's what the Labor Party does when they have a long stint in opposition. And if you can't win the election, well, the next best thing to do is to control the party. And the scenario in this situation is that New South Wales provides the leader after an election loss, which is increasingly likely at this stage, and the leader would end up being Angus Taylor, who would then reclaim his moderate credentials and of the party. He'd give up this idiocy that he's frequently displayed over the past 12 years in Parliament and then leads the Liberal Party to victory in the 2028 federal election. So that's what the theory is. And this, of course, could also happen earlier if the Liberal Party wins this election, but Peter Dutton loses the seat of Dickson. So, that's another permutation, but that would be a lot of hard work to get that permutation happening. So it's a lot easier to leak all of the details to the Labor Party and make sure that the Liberal Party does lose this election. And if Peter Dutton loses the seat of Dickson, well, that would be an added bonus. But Peter Dutton did complain about the leaks from within the Liberal Party just a few weeks ago, so that obviously hasn't stopped. And I'd say there will probably be more of this during the rest of the campaign.
I should point out that New South Wales Liberal Party is a bit of a mess in terms of, it's not the basket case that the Victorian Liberal Party is, where it's completely run by far-right Christian nationalist extremists. And there are, I think, no Victorian moderates anywhere near power. New South Wales, Mark Speakman, the leader of the opposition, is a moderate and has said things that have even been contrary to what the Berejiklian government, and Gladys Berejiklian was considered a moderate, although of course she was, like many moderates in the Liberal Party at all level, struggled to contain the lunatic minority. Malcolm Turnbull was another one, for example.
Oh, John Howard got rid of all the moderates back in before 1996.
Yeah, they did that massive purge. And from there, Australia has struggled to have a good Liberal Party in government. And by good, I don't mean one that I agree with, but one that understands governing for everybody, not just governing for the few. Nick Greiner is considered a social moderate, but a hardline economist. Speakman's advantage is that the Liberal Party was hammered out, and a lot of the extremists lost their seats. Quite rightly too. They weren't terribly good local members. And the surviving members tend to be moderate, but there is still a noisy rump of Christian nationalists, of conspiracy theorists, of people with a tenuous grasp on reality in the party.
I think that's also one of the hidden stories within this election campaign. Like, it is being reported, but there is a few Liberal Party candidates who have been disendorsed because they've just been so outrageously right-wing.
Yeah, when you're too right-wing for the modern Liberal Party, there was that guy who thought that women shouldn't serve in the military. And he didn't quite say because they were better off at home, but he suggested that they didn't have the emotional fortitude or the toughness that's required. Clearly, he's never met a woman.
Well, it also goes to show that a lot of men in politics are not emotionally equipped to be in politics.
Absolutely not. And he came out and said there's two factions going after Peter Dutton, the right and the left. And I'll be fair, I don't think he's lying about that. I'm not quite sure how accurate it is, but I think the perception that he has is that that's what's going on, and perception's everything. Perception is much more valuable than fact in politics. And certainly they're probably not going to use it during an election campaign. But if Peter Dutton survives the election in that he doesn't step down or lose his seat on election night, I think we will start to see the adjective embattled in front of his name. And I'm quite surprised that it hasn't happened yet, except it's an election campaign and the press does try to not obviously tip things.
Conveniently, you're in the city of churches. Will you be asking
Morning,
for forgiveness from female voters?
I think I am today. Look, I think we've made a mistake in relation to this policy, Sarah, and I think it's important that we say that and recognise it. And our intention always was to make sure that where taxpayers are working hard and their money is being spent to pay wages, that it's being spent efficiently. And that, of course, will always be the case. We want to spend taxpayers' money efficiently, but I think Labor's been able to get away with twisting this into something it wasn't.
Peter,
work from home.
This is more than that. This
Sarah,
is quite a backflip. I mean, this was one of your signature policies.
We're listening to what people have to say. We've made a mistake in relation to the policy. We apologise for that and we've dealt with it.
We don't usually see a policy dump during an election campaign, but the Liberal Party decided to scrap its policy to make public service workers work from the office full time and end their work from home arrangements. And this policy was a big mess in the first place. First of all, it was going to be all public service, and then it was just going to be public service in Canberra. Then it was going to be some, but not all, frontline workers only. And then it was discovered that none of this could happen until 2027 because there is a public service agreement in place at the moment, and that doesn't expire for another 2 years. So it was a thought bubble of an idea in the first place. It wasn't properly thought out. And the fact that they ran with this policy in the lead up to an election campaign leads to doubts about other policy issues that haven't been thought through as well. And it's obvious that they were bleeding a lot of support over this policy pretty much from the time that they announced it about a month ago, I think it was. And initially they were using this as a tactic to appeal to other groups within the electorate. They were targeting the blokes in utes, the tradies, and all of those people who can't practically work from home, and also pushing that idea that if you are working from home, well, you must be lazy or not doing your job. But they didn't realise that most of the tradies and the blokes with utes probably do have partners who are working from home, and that really works out very well for them. So it shouldn't have been a policy in the first place, and you're left wondering, well, what else are they going to backflip on? Because they've got a wide range of policy ideas that just don't have very much substance to them.
There's this denial that COVID ever happened, and that's even from people who believe that it was a real disease, which it was, who believed that the lockdowns were necessary, which they were, and who saw the world change. And I've said before, COVID was really our generation's World War One, in that the old systems died after COVID. We're just holding on to them, which they did too after World War One, but they became less and less practical. We need to think about working from home as a viable opportunity. And before I go on, I do acknowledge that there are those of you out there who hate working from home, who could work from home if they wanted, but would prefer the sociability of the office, the idea that you can theoretically walk out your front door, almost severance-like, almost, go to work, have your workplace as a separate area of activity and productivity, etc., and come home over night time. I do understand that, but I've spent most of my career working from home, and I like the fact that I know everything is. I get a lot more work done because you're not distracted by other people as much. It saves money in transport and clothing, and by clothing I do wear clothes at home, but I don't have to buy as many nice stuff for work.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, I thought I better clarify that. Food, it's cheaper for everybody to work from home. And I think a lot of workplaces have come up with a dual model where couple of days a week you're in the office because it is important. And one thing that was pointed out to me by one of our listeners is that when you work from home, you can't see how you can progress through a job. You can't be as easily mentored. You can't watch that progression of going from clerk through to administrative assistant through to junior manager or junior supervisor and on and up. Much harder to achieve that type of thing because you can't see the job working. And that was a very decent argument too for not working from home. Having said that, the party of freedom, the party of liberation, the party of individualism, wanting you to go into work because I suspect it's because their developer donors are taking a bath on expensive CBD properties in the capital cities and major rural centres. And then, of course, what a lot of people noticed is that all of this time, Dutton's saying he'd live in Kirribilli and essentially work from home. So it was a policy that was not thought through, and a policy that I think the worst thing you can be in Australian politics, at least from the public perception of things, is a hypocrite.
Oh, and I think that dumping this policy during an election campaign, it's actually created a twofold effect. It shows that there's a lack of conviction in your own policies, and even if you do dump it, well, your opponents are going to keep pushing it. They can say, oh, look, it was actually a policy. Now they've dumped it, but they will introduce it after the election because it was there as a policy. And Anthony Albanese referred to this comment from Tony Abbott on the day just before the 2013 election.
I trust everyone actually listened to what Joe Hockey has said last week and again this week. No cuts to education, no cuts to health, no change to pensions, no change to the GST, and no cuts to the ABC or SBS.
And then, of course, the coalition went on to cut education, cut health, cut the ABC and cut SBS. So this is a policy or a process that wasn't thought through properly. And who knows, it might have actually been his own policy team trying to sabotage Peter Dutton to say, oh, look, Peter, here's a great new policy. Let's end work from home arrangements. That will mainly affect women. Yeah, it's going to be a good policy, big winner. And while you're at it, here's a nuclear power policy that we've developed just for you, and that's going to be a big winner too. So you never know what goes on behind the scenes. And I don't know if it would have been just better to leave this policy there and just not talk about it anymore or reframe it in a different way, because it just feeds into other policy ideas. What else have they not thought through properly? Nuclear, health, education, all of these other areas. And for me, it also shows that they just have not done the hard work over the past 3 years during this time that they've been in opposition. And I think they were just hoping to roll back into government again. All of this stuff that should have been road tested years ago, but they just couldn't be bothered doing that.
Since probably Howard, or after Howard, there's been this sense that, and of course we can probably go back before then too, there's been this sense that they don't need to give policy. Labor has to be visionary and broad and confident and brassy and inspirational. The Liberal Party can bring in a Scott Morrison and expect that they will win, and in that case they did. And when the Liberal Party tend to go into their periods of non-government, when you have inspirational Labor leaders, when you have Labor leaders who can unite a town hall or who can look good on television, or Labor needs to earn the election, whereas the Liberal Party tends not to.
Well, they just feel like they can just turn up.
Yeah, and unfortunately it's not really like that. It's not Mr. Menzies anymore, who looked after things and was a very nice man and the leader we needed in the 50s, trademark copyright. You have to show your worth as a leader. You have to be inspirational now, I think. I've said before, I don't think the next Liberal Prime Minister has been elected to Parliament yet. There's a dearth of leadership talent in the party. And I'll be fair, there might be a backbencher who I'm not aware of, whose time is next month. And that person might go on to inspire everybody and they win the next election. But if the polls are right, they're going to lose a couple of seats, including possibly the seat of Dixon. Now, before Labor supporters start cheering, Labor's not travelling that well either. Two-party preferred, they absolutely are. But it looks like Labor is going to only gain 1 or 2 seats. And most of the Liberal and national seats that are lost, and the Nationals is a whole other thing, and I don't think they're going to lose many, if any, seats, will go to independents, Greens, and other candidates like that, not the Liberal Party. And this is where the election becomes really interesting. We're watching the old order break down and a new order in which the shape is uncertain rise up.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
We've already had the fake tradie during the campaign, and it's not quite the fake renter, but it's almost there. And there was an issue in the seat of Kooyong where the Liberal Party candidate Amelia Hamer has been pushing this idea of being a renter to the media at every opportunity.
Look, I'm just going to be listening to the local community, advocating for them where I can, and talking about the real issues down here, which is, cost of living. I'm just down here, just off Glenferrie Road. We've got a lot of traders in this area, a lot of small businesses, and they're telling me when I'm going in and I'm having a chat, they're telling me that they're really struggling at the moment. And people in this community are actually really struggling with the cost of living. They're struggling to pay the mortgage. They're struggling to pay their rent. I know my rent's gone up significantly. I'm a renter. I'm just having those conversations with people every day.
And that was actually a clip from June last year, and it's got to a point where every media interview that she's done over the past 9 months has pushed this idea of being a renter. And there's nothing wrong with renting. I've been doing it for most of my life. But Amelia Hamer was trying to make herself more relatable to millennials, trying to make herself a woman of the people and just in tune with what it's really like to struggle. And David, it sounded like so much of a struggle that I was going to tip in a few $100s into her campaign just to help out. But then it was revealed that while it is true that Amelia Hamer rents an apartment in Hawthorn, she actually owns two properties, one in London valued at $1.5 million and another property in Canberra valued at $1.25 million. And these were bought many years ago, so it's not like they were just purchased a couple of weeks ago and she happened to forget about it. And in a place like Kooyong, I don't think anyone would care if she's a renter or owns two properties or both of these. It's the deception that really matters. She pushed that idea of being a renter, wanting to get into the housing market, but she's already there. And she also claimed that she wouldn't be able to have children because her rented apartment was just too small. But all of this is a complete pile of crap. Now, she probably wasn't going to win the seat against the community independent Monique Ryan. She does have some chance, but not much, and especially after this incident. But why the need to lie, David? Voters will accept candidates for who they are, if they are genuine. But now she's made herself the focus of attention for all the wrong reasons. And it's always that issue about being caught out by the electorate. And it always makes them think, well, if you're lying about this, well, what else are you lying about? And it also gives your opponent so much material to work with.
I'm not quite sure how you spin it. I was thinking you could say, look, I'm renting at the moment and I have two investment properties, which suddenly gone. And in Kooyong, which is a rather wealthier suburb, there are pockets of renters. It touches the Melbourne University, so there's student accommodations and there's a little bit of public housing and things like that in Kooyong. I guess we could say her intentions were good. She wanted to show that she wasn't another wealthy liberal with a property portfolio living comfortably in her own house, that she's renting and that she understands the uncertainty of renting and the cost of renting and that the place is small, etc. But having a house in London and having a house in Canberra doesn't look good. If she'd had a house in Bendigo or Geelong or Leongatha or Warrnambool and was renting in the city, she might have got away with that as struggling. But yeah, Canberra's not known for its cheap housing and London is, well, London, unless it's London, Ontario.
Oh, but for me, it's not either renting or owning two properties and doing both at the same time. That for me isn't the issue. It's just the lie that preceded all of this.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Trying to push through that this is what she is when clearly it's not what she is. That's finished her. I think Monique Ryan, like I think all of the so-called teal independents, has been a good local member, concerned with the local community, helping her constituents, being present, being available. The reason Monique Ryan won was because Josh Frydenberg, apart from being a dreadful treasurer, was never in Kooyong, hardly spent any time, would only turn up around election time and then disappear for 2.5 years. Monique Ryan has, like the rest of the Teals, and I think too, Dai Lee, who isn't part of that particular movement, has been a really good local member in Cabramatta. As much as I disagree with her approach and her philosophy, she's been there, she's been present, she's been looking after her constituents. And Adam Bant, I am told, is a very good local member. Just to take that it's not just the Teal candidates who are good local members. Many of our independents and smaller party people take their job very seriously, even when they have higher responsibilities.
Oh, absolutely. But I've noticed that this is part of a strategy that's being employed by the Liberal Party at the moment. In those seats that are being held by the community independents, they used to be Liberal Party held seats and now they're not. It's also a strategy in those seats that have got a strong chance to be won by a community independent. And what the Liberal Party is doing at the moment is putting in people who look like they could be community independents or teal candidates, and they're actually using the colour teal in their marketing material. And they've done this in Kooyong, they've done this in the seat of Bradfield, where the community independent Nicolette Buller is likely to win. And they're using young women who have been successful outside of politics, and that's good to see, but they're right on Liberal Party brand. You know, they lie about their backgrounds. They're trying to look like they're poor or of the people when they're actually a banker or a corporate lawyer. You know, they're very illiberal, they're narky, they're generally not very nice people. And these are not people of the community. These are cooker-cutter caricatures from Liberal Party headquarters. You know, bankers, people of privilege, corporate lawyers, small-minded, small business people. And I'm not suggesting that the Labor Party's got all of these candidates who are community champions. Most of them are not. But I think that the Liberal Party does recognise that this is a problem for them in these seats, that they have to be more like the community and the teal independents. But if they want to win those seats back, well, it's not enough just to look like you're a teal independent. You actually have to be a strong member of the community. And so far, they've been missing the mark on this.
All of the, I'll call them the good independents, not the astroturfed Clive Palmer stuff, which, as I said, includes, I'm including the Greens, even though they're not independent, they're a legitimate party. But in terms of they're not being a part of either side of government, all of them said exactly who they were. A lot of the Teal candidates either had been members of the Liberal Party or had voted all their life for the Liberal Party and just got to the point where they realised that the party didn't align with their values anymore. And they all had the sense that the party didn't align with the people in their area anymore, which is, of course, a great reason to run. And when I say their values, it wasn't every value. I'm sure, and in fact I know because they've said it, when you talk to them about industrial relations and the role of the union, for example, when you talk to them about welfare, they're further to the right of you or I, Eddie. But they're honest and open about it. They've never claimed that they're not. And this is, again, where the Liberal Party seems to fall down. They will claim all this stuff, and then it turns out that's not true. And honesty gets you a long, long way in politics. Dishonesty tends not to. My point is that you're right. You need to be honest in a profession not known for its honesty.
We're making a fortune with tariffs, $2 billion a day. Do you believe it? I was told $2 billion a day. You know, I get hit by the press about tariffs. We're making $2 billion. This isn't 35 million, that's peanuts. $2 billion a day. And then they say, gee, they don't know. You know, this is only the enemy can be talking this way. In addition, we have a lot of countries coming to see us that want to make a deal.
There's always going to be some international issues that affect a local election campaign, and the big issue overall has been the effects of the tariff actions of the United States, which have affected global markets, including in Australia. And it's really hard to predict what will happen here. The markets did go down dramatically and then came back up dramatically. UF tariffs have now been paused for 90 days, and there is some suspicion of insider trading, and I couldn't possibly suggest anyone, David, but if I was pushed on it, I'd probably be looking at Donald Trump and Elon Musk, but that's just between you and me, David, so please don't tell anyone about that. But
my lips are sealed.
But so far, this has not been very good. And generally when these types of issues occur and there's instability at this point of a campaign, there just hasn't been enough time for the full effects to be felt by the electorate. And it's only been a week since all of this turmoil started. And if the electorate can feel that there's turmoil on the horizon, then this is when they're less likely to want to have a change of government.
Yeah, Trump came in like a wrecking ball, to quote noted philosopher Miley Cyrus. There was that wonderful clip of the US hearings where the Democratic senator asks Secretary of Trade, why are we hammering Australia with a 10% tariff? We're in trade surplus with Australia. We're going to lose that. And he goes on, Australia doesn't buy any of our beef or pork. Australia buys very little beef or pork from overseas. We have a lot of it. And Australia has some of the toughest border biosecurity in the world. And in the end, the Democratic senator says, I know that you are smarter than that answer, which I thought was a very nice way of putting things. And really, they can't explain why all these tariffs were put on. China's at 100 and I've seen two figures, 104% and 125% tariff, which is going to be a big problem because a lot of the stuff that America manufactures, the parts are made in China. And he hasn't seemed to have thought through any of this. He doesn't understand how free trade works. He doesn't understand how tariffs work. A few people have pointed out that Russia has no tariffs put on it, which is suggestive, although there's trade sanctions anyway. So that may be that there was no trade till you realise that they put tariffs on the unpopulated McDonald Herd Island, which has a population of around 4,000 penguins, who I guess are the biggest penguin manufacturing facility in the Southern Hemisphere at least.
I think Feathers McGraw was most unhappy about that.
Of all the people to annoy, I wouldn't be annoying Feathers McGraw from Wallace and Gromit. No way. He's started to wind them back. He's given everyone 90 days, which to me seems like a coward's duck, as he's realised this has gone too far too quickly. It's one thing to trash the economy like they tried in Brexit so they could short the pound, and they missed the deadline because the Brexiteers dithered and they were stopped by anti-Brexit people. So a lot of money was lost by people who thought they were going to make a lot of money. I don't even think that there was that level of strategy. It's just we will crash the economy, we'll buy all the stocks when they were low, and we'll sell them when it bounces back. There was no bouncing back under that model. And so he's now got 90 days to think about how can he wreck the economy without wrecking it so much that it gets wrecked for everybody, not just the poor and small.
And the general rules of politics during an election campaign is that the electorate will assess what the government has done over the past 3 years and then consider whether it's competent enough to continue for the next 3 years. So, if you like, it's a combination of assessing the past and assessing the future prospects as well, but also comparing the government with whether the opposition can do any better. But when there's turmoil on the horizon, which is what's happening right now, I think this changes that equation. It's almost like crisis management and not wanting too much upheaval or too much change. And the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, in this situation can say, well, look at our record. We've managed the economy during the very difficult times in the past, and that record is not perfect. But I think generally he has been competent. And whatever we might think about the competence of the Liberal Party, or whether they keep saying that they are the better economic managers, which they are clearly not, during these times of turmoil or potential turmoil, the electorate tends to gravitate towards what they do know, rather than what they don't know in someone like Angus Taylor. And the other point is that the Labor Party can also highlight, well, okay, there is a lot of international turmoil on the markets at the moment, and the person who's creating a lot of this is the United States President, Donald Trump, and who in Australia loves Donald Trump and is copying a lot of his policy ideas? Well, that's Peter Dutton. And That's what they want to introduce here. And I think it was a really big mistake for Peter Dutton to wed himself too closely to Donald Trump, not just because the policy ideas are terrible, but associating himself with someone who is on the way to destroying the US economy and upending the global markets.
Timu Trump, they were calling him, which I think is a great name. It didn't quite have the stickability of Fizzer for Malcolm Turnbull, for example, or Dickhead for Scott Morrison, but it says all you need to know. The other thing too, which none of Donald Trump's fans seem to get, is that Trump will ruin your life. How many of his bright, shining young things with promise ended up in jail, ended up with ruined careers, ended up unemployable, ended up completely trashed as human beings? Trump uses people, abuses them, and for some reason hasn't had the consequence. And I think it's the triumph of the stupid, in that Trump's too stupid to think of consequence. Or if I destroy this person, that might be bad down the track, so I better protect them. Nope, just bang, gone. And then when things happen down the track, I put my trust in the wrong people. Always. How a CEO, genius salesman, can continually put his trust in the wrong people again and again and again and again, and retain this self-belief and the belief of his followers. Now, he's lost a lot of those followers, let's be fair, but there's still that core of people who will accept that he has done nothing wrong and that everything he does is genius, and if we don't understand or if it looks bad, it's because we're not thinking at his level. But I think it's just because he doesn't think, he just does, and then moves on to the next thing. And then you're Steve Bannon, who's back in his side. I don't know what Steve Bannon is thinking. He went to jail for the guy. Michael Cohen, who will never talk to Trump again except in a courtroom. JD Vance is heading that way. Mike Pence. It went extremely badly for Mike Pence. Mike Pence ended up getting sympathy from the left because Trump's followers had decided that Pence had betrayed Trump by following the Constitution and were going to hang him. Dutton will be the same. Cling like a limpet to the hull of the Dutton ship and then just scraped off and discarded when he's not useful. And Dutton may never be useful to Trump. And while there are people in Australia who do like Donald Trump, more people don't. And that, as much as anything else, is going to cost Dutton seats in this election.
And a convoy of paramedics from the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, civil defense teams and a UN employee are responding to a plea for help. Their vehicles are marked. Their emergency lights are clearly visible. When the convoy stops, Israeli soldiers open fire for minutes on end.
There was an incident in Palestine last week where 15 paramedic and rescue workers were killed by Israel Defence Forces, and all the evidence points to them being executed. And the killings, genocide and ethnic cleansing perpetrated by the IDF in Palestine and supported and condoned by the government of Israel have continued over the past 2 months. And that includes women, children, aid workers, medics and journalists. And I'm not suggesting that killing men is okay and not a problem, but all of these people are less likely to be part of the Hamas that Israel keeps going on about, but no one seems to be spared at the moment. And we suggested a few weeks ago that Palestine and the Middle East wouldn't feature at all during this election campaign, and that the government would hope that the issue would just go away. Here's the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, asked about this incident over the weekend.
What I have said is there needs to be a full and thorough investigation into this, and what I have consistently said since the conflict in Gaza began and since the horrific events of October 7 with the terrorist attack by Hamas is that we want a ceasefire, we want hostages to be returned, and we want international law and international humanitarian law to be observed by all parties. Now, international humanitarian law requires, amongst other things, humanitarian workers to be protected. And that applies to everybody. And we are working with other countries on a declaration for the protection of humanitarian personnel. It's something I've engaged with many countries on, because it is time that the world remembered and reaffirmed the commitment we all gave each other in the aftermath of World War II that we would protect humanitarian workers as well as civilians.
So Penny Wong is working on a declaration, and David, I'm sure that will sort things out. And these are the same talking points and rubbish from before. And whatever the Liberal Party is asked about this, they just keep reverting to talking about Hamas and anti-Semitism. So anyone looking for some clarity on Australia's position on Gaza, or at least calling out Israel for its war crimes, they won't be getting that during this election campaign from the major parties. Here's the Prime Minister speaking about this issue during the week.
I certainly understand that for many Australians, or particularly those with families or relatives either in Israel or in Gaza or indeed in Lebanon, this has been a very traumatic period. My government's approach is that every innocent life matters, and we want to see a ceasefire, we want to see hostages released, we want to see aid get through to Gaza. We have made sure as well that Australia has taken, I think, a responsible position of continuing to call for not just the short-term issues in terms of ceasefire, aid to people in Gaza, the release of hostages, but also our principled stance of a two-state solution. I want to see both Israelis and Palestinians live in peace and security side by side.
And again, this doesn't really say much. No one really knows what a two-state solution means anymore, but you'd expect that everything should be up for discussion during an election campaign, but there are certain areas the major parties just don't want to deal with. The Australian Greens, they've got a different approach to this, and aside from a small number of independents in Western Sydney and out of Melbourne, and those affiliated with the Muslim vote bloc, these are the only ones who are prepared to call it out for what it is. Here's the leader of the Australian Greens, Adam Bant.
You now have tens of thousands of children who have been killed by an army and who have been separated from their parents. The healthcare system has been destroyed. People's homes have been reduced to rubble. Amnesty International says there's a genocide occurring, okay? We've said that, but if you don't necessarily believe us, listen to Amnesty International. There are now international courts that have issued arrest warrants for the extremist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We have just said from day one that the people of Palestine and the people of Israel are both entitled to live in a just and lasting peace and have their rights to self-determination recognised under international law. And we've said that that has to be premised on an ending of the occupation of Palestine, because that is the only way that there can be that just and lasting peace. Our position is grounded in humanity. It's grounded in international law. I suspect that at this election, there are going to be many people who will be voting on the basis of the Australian government's backing of this invasion. There will be many people who are going to change their vote on that. So we're going to keep saying very, very strongly, as we see now the ceasefire failing to hold and we see paramedics killed, we see more invasions, we see more deaths, we're going to keep saying the killing's got to stop. The killing has to stop.
And I think this will be the case, David, that there will be a lot of people who will change their vote based on the government's lack of interest and action in what's been happening in Palestine. Now, it probably won't be enough to change the election outcome, but I think it will be enough to let people in government know that they need to do a lot more in this area to support the people of Palestine, practically and diplomatically, and not just listen to the Israel lobbyists and Zionist groups in Australia.
Yeah, it was a terrible incident. And then, again, they lied about it. And then the cameras came out and said, no, they were clearly ambulances. The Red Crescent, the Islamic equivalent to the Red Cross, both brilliant organisations, both compassionate, positive organisations that do a lot of good in very bad circumstances. The Red Crescent basically claimed that we had our lights on. The Israeli Defence Force said, well, no, the lights weren't on. We could see these large vehicles coming over the hill. We thought they were the reinforcements, so we thought we better take care of them before it escalated. But when the film was released, it turned out that they had their sirens on, that the Red Crescent signs were clearly visible. Israel had yet again committed another war crime. I'm not quite sure how much longer this can go on. And I'm hoping that Australia will start to distance itself and stop listening and stop being scared of the Israel lobby or the Zionist lobby and let the truth come out. And if they do the right thing, then let that come out too. I'm all about what happened, the facts of the matter. And at the moment, the facts of the matter are being obscured by people who don't want the facts to come out. And that's just not good enough in a modern democracy.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
We had the first public leadership debate of the campaign, and it was a pretty lacklustre affair. Both leaders were asked questions from the audience and both answered according to their respective talking points.
Thanks to the hard work of Australians, including the people in this room, inflation is down, wages are up, unemployment is low at 4.1%, we've created 1 million jobs, and importantly, interest rates have started to fall. What this election is about, though, is what happens next. Whether we continue to build on those foundations with a tax cut for all 14 million Australians, strengthening Medicare, including those bulk billing rates getting up to 90%, and making sure we have urgent care clinics, free TAFE, the 20% of student debt, and making more things here in Australia through a future made in Australia. Now is not the time to cut. Now is not the time to look backwards. Now is the time to look forward and seize the opportunities and build Australia's future.
People have seen the government make mistakes, starting with the voice and priorities that just haven't accorded with your own priorities. Almost 30,000 small businesses have gone broke, and behind each one of those stories, there is somebody who's lost their house or lost their life savings. People have gone backwards because when you go to the supermarket now, you're now paying 30% more for groceries, paying about 32% more for your electricity. And the Prime Minister promised at one of these debates at the last election that your power bills would go down by $275. Instead, they're up by $1,300. I want to provide support to Australians from the first day that we're elected, and that is through a 25 cent a litre cut to fuel, both diesel and unleaded.
It wasn't really a debate at all, and there was virtually no interaction between the two leaders. It was probably more of a warm-up act for Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton, and the debate was mainly available through Sky News and the Daily Telegraph website, but only if you had a subscription. You could watch it for free through the Sky News app, but not many people would have watched this election debate. Both leaders, I think, performed well, according to their respective talking points. Anthony Albanese has a good story to tell, but just doesn't seem to be able to tell it effectively. Peter Dutton should have been crucified in this sort of forum, but wasn't. And there's also the question of who performed better. It probably was Albanese marginally, but the studio of 100 people chosen by a research company and chosen as completely undecided people, 44% said that Albanese won, 35% said that Dutton won, and 21% were undecided. So there's still 21% of the undecided who are still undecided, and Bronwyn Bishop was very certain about who won the debate.
Now, Bronwyn, starting with you, what's your verdict? How did that go? Who won?
Well, to me it was clear that Peter Dutton did win.
There will be two more of these debates during the campaign, but they don't really mean that much because a Labor leader has won every election debate or forum over the past 15 years, but Anthony Albanese is the only Labor leader who has gone on to win the election. So winning the debate doesn't really mean much more than just actually winning the debate. And we'll probably keep having them because of tradition. And I do like watching them just to see how leaders can synthesise their ideas under pressure. But there's not much of a debate, and the skill of oratory certainly isn't there. And there's probably not much point to these debates anymore.
I've never liked this formalised focus group, talking points, move your hands in that particular way, dress properly. If I can go all nationalist for a moment. The best speakers in Australian politics hone their skills in front of unruly, unpredictable crowds. John Howard thrived in front of a hostile crowd. I saw it. And he could win the crowd over. I saw this when he was just been dumped as leader of the opposition in the early 90s for what was thought to be the final time. And he was finished. And I saw him at a debate at the University of New South Wales where I was a young, fresh-faced student. It was a speech on why Australia should retain the monarchy to the New South Wales Law School. A group of students not renowned for their monarchical, pro-monarchy views. We can go to Whitlam, who was a master at handling hecklers, famously to one guy who'd been interrupting constantly for the whole 20-minute speech. And the guy says, "What are you going to do about abortion policy?" And Whitlam shoots back, "In your case, I wish it was retrospective." This is much more interesting. Bob Menzies, similar thing. "What are you going to do about housing?" "I'm going to put an H in front of it." Wins the crowd over. Ted Theodore, who was treasurer in the Scullin government briefly and Premier of Queensland, at a shearer's shed in Queensland, so, extremely rough. And a guy continually hassled him. He said, "Come up here and give your point of view." And the guy stepped on the stage and Theodore picked him up and threw him off. How to deal with rough crowds. Probably my favourite, George Reid. Not my favourite politician, but one of my favourite retorts. George Reid was a Premier of New South Wales and then Prime Minister of Australia. And he was a rather rotund gentleman. And someone yelled out, "What are you going to call it, George?" referring to the fact that he looked pregnant. And he said, "Well, if it's a girl, I will name it after the Queen. If it's a boy, I will name it after the Prince of Wales. But if it's what I think it is, all piss and wind, I'll name it after you, young fella." And that type of thing is far more entertaining. And I'm not saying that we should just have the candidates hurl insults at the audience.
Well, that would make it a lot more interesting. But I think a lot of political leaders just try to be as inoffensive as possible.
Yeah, they were still getting their points across. And with John Howard, he didn't say anything particularly funny, but he stood up in front of that crowd and basically spoke them down to the point where they could at least see where he was coming from. Even if they weren't going to become staunch monarchists, they could see his point. And I think that's how I do it. I'd just get in, 50 unionists of the old school, 50 Clive Palmer lunatics, 50 staunch Liberal voters, and a couple of undecideds, and turn the microphone on. Let them start speaking and not shut the crowd up. Say, if you got a comment, just yell it out, see what happens. And I think that would, one, improve public debate a great bit, because suddenly you've got to think on your feet. You can't go to talking points. You can't go to, this is 0.6 of 9 points. You've got to think on your feet. You've got to do it. And it's a very Australian thing too. I couldn't see either Peter Dutton or Anthony Albanese calling someone up on the stage and throwing them off. Dutton would probably want to, but I don't think he's got the ability anymore. And Anthony Albanese isn't violent in that kind of way. This is a good thing that they wouldn't do that, by the way. But certainly having them face a tough audience and having the audience go to town would, one, make for much better television, and two, really show the mettle of the leader. And you may be surprised in who wins this type of stuff, and you may not. And you might have neither candidate doing very well, and that's fine too, rather than these bland, orchestrated, dull affairs in which you come out not much wiser than when you went in.
And there were some strange incidents during the campaign, and I think a campaign is usually the time when the true character of leaders and all of the candidates does come through. And there's always going to be mishaps and strange things that happen during a campaign. And Peter Dutton just happened to kick a football into the head of a Channel 10 cameraman during an election stunt on the football field.
Oh, got him! Got him! Yeah! Now that was... Oh, he's split him open too.
And the cameraman is also a former Iraqi refugee and asylum seeker, so it seemed quite symbolic of Dutton's political career, kick into those less fortunate. And the response that he gave, I think that's actually quite a strange response. Most people would be horrified and made sure that the person is okay, but Dutton seemed to take great delight in kicking a football into someone's head and then made fun of him for not catching the ball. He then tried to laugh it off and suggested that if it was Albanese that kicked the football, he would have totally lied about it. Now, it's only a small incident, David, but it just almost seems sadistic and totally unempathetic. And I just think you have to do much better than that during a campaign.
It's a bit reminiscent of Scott Morrison giving the full body tackle in a game of soccer to the kid that was on the day just before the election. That you kick the ball and it hits someone in the head. That could have been wiped off as an accident. It's very hard to kick that accurately if you're not a professional.
Oh, I'm not suggesting that he did it deliberately, but of course it was an accident. But his response was quite weird.
It was the response, and even laughing about that he cut his head open. Head injuries are not known for being the easiest things to get around, and I hope that the cameraman is okay. I think he is. I think it was a minor thing as far as these things go, but you don't go to work in an Australian electoral campaign thinking that you're going to go home with a bandage on your head. It's not a war zone, for example. And yeah, Dutton's triumphant bullying, if there was anything more that we needed to show that he's not fit to be the leader of the country that Australia needs, that was probably it.
And the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was also heckled during the campaign, and he was heckled by a climate change activist.
Mr. Albanese, you say you care about young people, and yet since getting elected, your government has approved 33 new coal and gas projects.
And I haven't.
You are condemning young people like me to a lifetime of climate disasters. Of course, we have poor mental health issues. When will you listen to young people? When will your government stop approving new coal and gas projects?
Now, you can't argue with that. During this term, the Labor government has continued opening up more coal mines and gas fields, and they've used a wide range of weasel words to justify these mines and fields, claiming that they are not actually new, they're just expansions of existing coal mines and gas fields. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're making an existing coal mine deeper and an existing gas field bigger, well, that's the same as opening up more coal mines and gas fields. And the Labor government has also approved 173 new fracking wells in Queensland for the benefit of Santos and Arrow Energy. And during this protest, Anthony Albanese said that he didn't want to comment about the incident because it would only encourage more people to protest. But this is the time that people should protest. Most MPs and most governments are only interested in how their actions affect their votes, which means that they stay in power if they get enough votes in an election. And this also means that they also get their $3.38 per primary vote and continue to open the doors to donors in fossil fuel industries. So there's no point in protesting or demonstrating after the election when it's already been decided. This is the time that people's voices need to be heard, whether the Prime Minister likes it or not. There's a new batch of opinion polls and there's not much new to report here, David. All of these opinion polls are continuing to show a drift away from the Liberal and National Coalition, and this would be in response to the terrible start to the campaign that the Coalition had last week. Newspoll is showing 52% to the Labor Party in two-party preferred voting and 48% to the Coalition. The Morgan poll is 53.5 to 46.5% in favour of the Labor Party. YouGov is 51.49 to the Labor Party as well. And it actually needs to be the opposite of these numbers if the coalition is to get into a position of either minority government or majority government. And this is still unpredictable, but the two-party preferred vote is getting close to the final results recorded at the 2022 federal election. And we've also explained before that Labor could increase its vote compared to the last election but lose seats, and conversely it could actually decrease its vote but actually pick up seats. So it's not going to be the usual type of election process that we go through on election night, but I think you'd still much rather be in the position of the Labor Party than the position of the coalition at the moment.
Yeah, I know Labor will try and make themselves underdogs because one of the received wisdom is that the underdog tends to get sympathy votes, which can push you over the line. I've been saying since election night that it's mathematically impossible for the Liberal Party to win this election. Nothing has happened in the last 3 years that has changed my mind. I did think they might get probably 4, but maybe up to 8 seats, which would have been good news for Peter Dutton. They're still nowhere near government, but they're a little bit closer, and it would have shown a shift in voting intentions and all of that. At this point, after Dutton flying away from Cyclone Alfred and then everything else that's happened over the last week, I'm not sure that they're going to gain 1 seat. They might win some seats that they didn't have, but they're going to lose other seats too. He's probably lost Queensland, I think, and he's certainly lost southern Queensland. These things matter.
Oh, and also the Liberal Party couldn't have had a worse week than they did last week, so you'd expect that they will improve during the campaign. And Peter Dutton did seem more assured in that Sky News debate, but the problem would have been that not many people would have watched that, and he lost the debate anyway. He also had the pressure of his father having a heart attack just a few hours before the debate, so that would have had a big effect on him as well. But the week just gone, and next week, week 3, these are critical parts of the election campaign, and I think you've mentioned that right at the beginning of this episode. And the way that campaigns are run these days, there doesn't seem to be the big moment that can swing elections anymore. But if there is to be a big moment, and that goes for both sides, well, it has to happen next week, because the school holidays will have started. And as we've pointed out in the past, school holidays don't affect everyone, but they do affect a large number of people. And children, of course, they don't vote. But during this time, key messages will be lost or diffused. And then after the school holidays, there's the Easter break. And then the day after the Easter break, that's when the early voting begins. And that's not to say that there won't be any campaigning at all once the early voting period commences. That's when a lot of this stuff will ramp up, but you do need to get your key messages out there earlier on during the campaign, and the coalition just seems to have fallen too far behind at this stage.
Yeah, momentum is everything, and you can regain momentum, but I think they've lost too much momentum to be able to get through. I think it's going to be, for them to make any gains, it's going to have to be something catastrophic, which nobody, not even them, wants. The death of somebody prominent or something like that, and nobody wants that. And of course, Peter Dutton's father having that heart attack a couple hours before is something that is terribly unfortunate, and I hope his father is okay. He's a very old man, I understand, and we don't want that happening either. Hopefully Peter Dutton's father is okay and recovers well.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.